So, if it's okay, some questions about before and during the war and some childhood questions. The first one is, what are some of your earliest memories from your childhood in Wang Yuan, even as the war was going on around you?
Yeah, I should clarify. I was born in Longswing, but I actually grew up in Saigon, so my mother took me out of Longxing when I was like 3 months old. A fairly privileged childhood. My family was considered wealthy in Vietnam. We had, maid, chauffeur, cook. That was prior to 1975. And after 1975, a lot of things changed. Our money was taken from us in terms of currency conversions. So, you know, all bank accounts were confiscated after 1975. So if you had, however much in bank accounts, those accounts were all seized by the government. Um, and if you had the foresight to take your money out of bank accounts and hid them in your mattress, they would flush that out by doing currency conversion. So, for example, your currency would become unusable or useless in 3 months because they'll put in this cycle of currency conversion. So you had to buy, 1 dong the new currency with 50 dong of the old currency. And your old currency ceased to be in circulation after, I think it was 3 months, so they did. I remember, we were scrambling to do that after, I think it was at least 2 or 3 times. And for those people who don't run a business or a retail outlet, right? They'll question you why you have all this cash. So, you probably get searched and, it'd be subject to various subjects' interrogations of where do you get all this money? So money was practically useless after all that, right? You invest in gold, right? The Vietnamese currency became worthless. During that period, a lot of economies or external forces just didn't do business with Vietnam. I'll give you some examples where goods that were previously available in Vietnam, like blue jeans or soaps made by, brands that you're used to here, like Procter and Gamble and, I remember my mom and her mom's siblings or sisters would value a bar of soap. I remember the brand was Came soap, as if it was made of gold, right? Because those items just weren't available anymore. You have to use soap that is not scented and doesn't smell very nice. Blue jeans, and just items that typically were available were no longer available. So you'd get them through black market, and you'd have to probably pay for them. Pretty expensive prices. Now, when you make major purchases, Vietnamese currency would not be accepted. Big purchases you have to buy in gold, so the currency exchange became gold.
Thank you. And I want to ask a follow up on that when the government began seizing accounts and assets. Was there a lot of communication around that? Did a lot of people have the foresight maybe to move into gold and have their assets retain some value? Or did it happen too quickly for that to occur?
It would not come with a lot of notification, right? The intent is to catch people off guard. And if you were privileged, educated, well-informed, you'd have a better opportunity to react to those things. But no, they're typically not intended to notify and provide advance warning.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question here. In the paragraph you submitted us, you mentioned your father passed away when you were very young.
Yeah, that's a correction. My mother's husband passed away. That's not my father. My brother's father passed away 3 months after he was born. My biological father was someone that my mother, left. When I was born, I didn't really know him, to be honest with you. And obviously my brother as well, because he died, within a few months of my brother being born. I think he was probably the love of my mother's life. What ended up happening was he had an exception, and because he was a university student, he was not conscripted to go to war. And when he was expelled from university, he was sent to the front lines. And the front line being, in Da Nang, where the demilitarized zone between North and South Vietnam was. And he was killed in action, and my mother had to go identify her husband's body in Da Nang.
I'm sorry. Then I'll move back towards as a child, just sort of the environment around the war starting. You mentioned sort of the financial seizures. Were there any particular moments or changes around you outside of the finances through the war started?
I don't know if it's within the context of what you're looking for, but I can certainly attest to a lot of change that I felt. Right? If you think about it. 1975, I was only 4 years old, right? But I was educated in French. French was my first language. My grandfather worked for the French government, and my family was privileged because of our association with the French government. So my mother and her siblings were all educated in French at the Marie Curie School. So obviously, when I started preschool and various schooling shortly after 1975, I was still attending French schools. But when the war ended and the government took over, brandished all foreign languages, books and literature as propaganda. So they burned it and destroyed it, and obviously French schools were outlawed, and I was switched from a French school to a Vietnamese school, and I still remember it was a bit of a change. I wasn't used to, being around, I guess, so many Vietnamese and Chinese speaking kids. Mostly around, French-speaking kids at school, where my aunt, my mother's younger sister, was a teacher. I went to school with her every day. And then one day I was told that, we're switching schools. And it's actually not that far. It's within walking distance, and the school curriculum had no French in it. And, just to give you a bit more context, right? So any foreign language taught in schools prior to 1975 was no longer allowed, right? So English, French, any foreign language except Chinese and Russian were allowed.
Just to follow up on that, when you switched into the Vietnamese school, there had to be a lot of other people from the French school maybe moving to that system. Was there a similar feeling around that?
I'm certain it was an adjustment. I, myself, don't remember it. I remember taking courses or being in classroom environment that I just wasn't accustomed to. It was a change, I remember, but I was so young, I don't think it really impacted me in terms of the material I was being taught.